The madness is about to begin tomorrow. The first and second round weekend begins. Brandy, I am super excited for all of this action, and we know that March is all about the drama. We've picked all of the games. We've talked about the mid majors. We've gone through all the matchup kind of dependent stuff. Now let's just talk strictly about storylines and all the dramatics that come with this tournament, possible matchups, coach rivalries, player matchups, etc. We'll go region by region. We'll start in the South. Just looking at this with these first round games and even beyond, what kind of stands out to you when you look at this top to bottom as just possible, games that get the juices going, get you excited for this tournament?
Yeah, I think the first thing that stands out is them putting Yale in Auburn's region. If Yale pulls off an upset again, the possibility of Auburn and Yale meeting for a rematch in the Sweet 16 from last year's first round, I would say is the first thing that could be really interesting. The other thing that I think is interesting is that in the first round, Auburn and Alabama State are playing each other. And Alabama State's head coach is a former assistant under Tony Barbee, a former Auburn coach that was fired.
Hmm.
And so a little bit of fun stuff there, but also these teams are from the same area code, within 45 minutes of each other, which I think is pretty neat. So I'm sure that'll be talked about during that game. And then just sticking with the South there, some other things too. Louisville making the tournament for the first time since 2019, and they did it with Pat Kelsey, first time head coaching position at a Power Four school. That's really impressive. And also Dusty May at Michigan, same situation there, where it's a first time Power Four head coach. Dusty May coming from FAU. So really neat that both Dusty May and Pat Kelsey made the NCAA tournament, and they're in the same region, pretty close to each other too in here.
A player matchup I'm noticing in the South that I'm really excited for: Marquette, New Mexico, Donovan Dent versus Cam Jones. Those are two absolute bucket getters there in that first round, the 7-10 game. Marquette at the 7, New Mexico at the 10. Marquette, they really could have done a lot better for themselves when it came towards seeding and whatnot. They kind of had their highs and lows throughout Big East play, which is where they kind of sit right now, reflecting in the seed line there. Just looking like far, far out, I think Sweet 16, Elite 8, the possibility of Auburn getting a possible get back spot on A&M if they're able to get past Yale and Michigan or UC there. I would be intrigued by that. And then in the Elite 8, if you get Auburn and Michigan State, the two best teams of the two best conferences, in my opinion, this season, obviously Auburn with the SEC, Michigan State with the Big Ten. I mean, that would just draw absolutely unreal ratings. And I'm excited too at the possibility of this second round matchup of Auburn and Louisville, because Louisville fans, I mean, they've been having a whole campaign on Twitter this week about how they didn't deserve the 8 seed and they got screwed by the draw. But I honestly think that if this is where they were going to be put at by the selection committee, they got about as good of a draw as they could have hoped for. They're going to be playing about 50 minutes down the road in Rupp Arena. The Louisville fans are going to get to that game. And assuming you get past Creighton, you get your best shot at the number one overall team in the field with the predominantly Louisville crowd, I would imagine. Although I know Auburn fans do travel quite a bit. And I just think that all sets up perfectly for some nice storylines there in the South. Is there anything else that we're seeing here? I know UNC, now that we've confirmed they're out of the first four, they're sitting here in this region. And that's a massive walking storyline in itself, just them being there to begin with.
Right. And the possibility of them potentially going on a run. We see all the time an 11 seed a play and kind of go on a strong run. Something else too that I noticed now that UNC beat San Diego State and is in, there are four teams in this region alone that were in this season's Maui Invitational. That's Auburn, UNC, Iowa State, and Michigan State. So definitely the possibility of some other non-con rematches there too. So that's kind of interesting, especially with Maui Invitational kind of having a little bit of a weaker field next season. Kind of to me, what kind of feels like maybe this past season with the NIL tournaments that are starting now. and with the players era, kind of that feels like that's where the bigger Power Four schools are going. So kind of neat that 4 teams from Maui are in this region.
Yeah, before we move on from the South and kind of look elsewhere, this kind of fits the storyline mold that we're talking to here. We've obviously mentioned the best teams here. We've made our Final Four picks from the region, but let's talk about a dark horse. What's a team in this region that maybe we don't expect to make a deep run, but that has the possibility and the potential to make a deep run? Because when I look at this thing, I think I know who my pick might be, but I'm intrigued to get yours as well.
Yeah, I think a dark horse in this region would have to be Marquette.
Hmm.
I think Marquette's had a good conference run in Big East, but isn't being talked about as much. And Cam Jones hasn't necessarily played his best basketball down the stretch, but he's still a really good player and is experienced in March. And Michigan State is what they're saying the weakest 2 seed out of all of the 2 seeds. And so I wouldn't be surprised if Marquette pulled off an upset over Michigan State, and then ended up facing, say, a UNC or an Ole Miss because Iowa State's without one of their best players. So I think I would have to ping Marquette. And Shaka Smart's a good coach. He knows what he's doing in March, and his defenses always show up. It's really just a question of, will his offense be there?
Yeah. Moving on from the South, before we actually do move on, you mentioned Iowa State. Book It with Tackett says that Lipscomb is winning that game in the 314 spot. I called it on the group bracket. I'm standing by it
You've
here
been
today.
on Lipscomb all week.
I'm sticking with it. There's just something about this matchup that just makes me think it's going to happen. I don't know if it's
There you
Kashawn
go.
Gilbert being gone, but it's just speaking to me. I don't know why. I just had to get that out there before we move on from the South. But you stole it right from me. I think Marquette has the possibility for a dark horse run if they get past New Mexico. I think that's a tricky spot for them. But moving on down into the West, I mean, there's only one obvious storyline here. Well, not only one, but the most just glaring and best one of them all is that quad with 7 Kansas, 10 Arkansas, and 2 St. John's. Bill Self, John Calipari, Rick Pitino, all in that one little quad with the possibility of facing each other. We're getting Self versus Cal in the first round, and then assuming St. John's takes care of Omaha, it's either going to be Self and Cal versus the Godfather in the second round. I mean, talk about a storyline, Brandy. That's the storyline of all storylines in that region.
I know. I'm just imagining all the Italian restaurants in Providence this weekend are being visited by these guys. This is like what I feel like what every college basketball person would dream of is Calipari, Bill Self, and Rick Pitino like all being there together. Like it's honestly unreal that they did that, but also very exciting. And the fact that Arkansas even made the tournament too with the start that they had to the season. And the fact that Kansas is a 7 seed and they were preseason #1 overall, and St. John's hasn't what I think it's been, I don't know, 20 plus years since they've made like a Sweet 16 or something like that.
I think it's been
There's some
25,
crazy,
maybe.
yeah, 25. There's some crazy stat out there about their success, and there are just so many jam-packed storylines here between coaches and players. With Kansas, you have Hunter Dickinson and his kind of last ride. Feels like he's been in college forever, but a great player nonetheless. And an Arkansas team who is getting Boogie Flan back, but also just lost Adu. So there's some player stories there too. That'll be really interesting to keep up with. I think that's probably the most exciting part of this bracket in the first round is Kansas and Arkansas and St. John's and Omaha, and what that potential round 2 matchup will look like.
Yeah, that's going to be must-see television, regardless of who comes out of Kansas versus Arkansas. Just assuming St. John's doesn't end up on the wrong side of history, we're looking at an epic second-round matchup there. And then I think the second one I'm looking at, just as far as matchups and kind of headlines go, is if UConn gets past Oklahoma and gets to take on Florida. I put an Instagram post out. You got an angry Dan Hurley, the back-to-back champions, taking on the title favorite that everybody's loving on with Florida. Todd Golden still needs to prove himself a little bit. I mean, there's a lot to be desired in that little quadrant as well when it just comes to the drama and the just cinematic aspect of this tournament.
Yeah, I think so too. And Todd Golden has never won an NCAA tournament game, and Florida right now is the betting favorite to win the national title. And they do seem like the hottest team in college basketball and the best team right now. So it'll be interesting if we get a round two matchup between Florida and the two-time defending national champions in UConn, who have definitely had a much worse season than their last two seasons. Also, in that UConn Oklahoma game, you have Jeremiah Fears, who plays for Oklahoma. That's most likely going to be a lottery pick. And he was on fire in the SEC tournament last week. And it'll be interesting to see how he kind of leads that Oklahoma team against UConn and Liam McNeely, kind of two freshmen who've been electric this season going at it. That'll be really exciting. And I honestly think right under that, with Memphis and Colorado State, and then Maryland and GCU, there's kind of going to be some intriguing matchups there too, because we talk about Florida being one of the hottest teams in the country, but Colorado State is a team that everybody's talking about. I think they're on like an 8-game win streak or something like that, where they're tied for the longest win streak in the country. And everybody's talking about Nick Clifford. And I feel like nobody's really talking about Memphis, which is weird to me. And I actually really like this Memphis team. They've beaten some really good teams this year, like 2-seed Michigan State, for example, or Ole Miss up there in the South region, who's a 6 seed. So this Memphis team is good. They are without Tyrese Hunter for now. But I think it's going to be really exciting to watch PJ Haggerty and Dane Deja go against Nick Clifford. And what a lot of people are saying is like the hottest, or I feel like it's one of the more popular picks, Colorado State over Memphis.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the trendier picks of them all. I'm trying to scan through here and see who I think my dark horse pick is. I'm kind of torn between a team or two here. Who's your dark horse pick? I'll let you go first while I try to decipher which one I want to stake my claim with.
Yeah, I would say that I don't know if this would be considered a dark horse or not because of how they're seated, but honestly think Maryland has the possibility of being a quote dark horse. They are 4 seeds, so I don't know if that necessarily qualifies for it, but Derek Queen has been so impressive, one of the best freshmen in the country, and Jacoby Gillespie, the transfer from Belmont, has been so great for them in their guard room. The Crab Five is what they're calling them. So I really like this Maryland team and could see them making a run. But honestly, and I know that you picked Colorado State, and I actually think Memphis is going to win that game. And I think that a Memphis-Maryland matchup could be one of the best matchups in the tournament. And I could see one of those, whoever wins that game, if we do get that matchup, going to a Final Four possibly.
Yeah, I like that. I think they do qualify as a dark horse here because, I mean, Florida seems to be the consensus Final Four pick of all these guys. Part of me really wants to just go out here and say that Dan Hurley's just going to snap into some different mode with this UConn team and be a dark horse. But at the same time, I don't see them getting past Florida. I think they're going to get that game against Oklahoma, but I think the road ends there. I just think that Florida team's too good. Honestly, gosh, it might sound crazy, but I mean, we've seen it happen before. 2014, John Calipari took an 8-seeded Kentucky team to the Final Four. What? I don't think it's going to happen, but what if he takes that 10-seeded Arkansas team on a run? I don't think they make the Final Four, but I mean, you look at
Yeah.
this, you get an
I mean, if
underwhelming
I would love
Kansas
to see,
team.
I would love to see. I'm probably picking Kansas in my official bracket. I would love to see though John Calipari versus Rick Pitino. I mean, every college basketball lover would. I mean, that's just we have to see that, right?
No,
Um,
yeah.
I mean, I could see it happening. Yeah, I
I
don't
don't
know.
think they're like, and let me clarify here. I don't think they're like a Final Four dark horse, but second weekend dark horse, I don't think that's unreasonable. I think
Yeah,
that with just the way this team has been so hard to get a read on, you've seen them drop games against LSU, but then they go into Rupp and beat Kentucky. They had a close game with Auburn. Like the talent and the ability to fight and compete is there. It's just a matter of whether it all clicks. And obviously, losing to Duthiero for the moment, Cal said he's doubtful for the first round game and possibly beyond, I would imagine. So we'll see how that unfolds. But I've seen John Calipari work some magic when it comes to that before. So just don't be surprised if you see him in the second weekend. He might be motivated after everybody's been dragging his name through the mud these last couple of years, and he's got some critics to prove wrong for sure. So we'll see what happens. Let's go ahead and move it on to the East region. Looking at these first round matchups, I see one second round matchup that could possibly bring some intrigue. I'm going to save that one, kind of pocket it for a little bit later. But looking at the East region, Brandie, what do you think would be one of the better storylines here in the round one games? Or if you want to go ahead and throw it on beyond into the second round and the Sweet 16, go for it.
Yeah, oh man. I've been a big proponent of Vanderbilt all season. I just don't think that they have it in them. But um I think a potential matchup between Vanderbilt and Alabama could be really fun, just two SEC teams going at it. Um, Especially with Vanderbilt having a first-year head coach and Mark Byington. Just being able to get to the tournament itself is really exciting. And I think that a matchup between a really fast-paced offense like Alabama would benefit them for how they run their offense. So I think like it's just the SEC clash for how good the SEC has been this year could be really exciting. Um, some other just like things to note, I guess, like BYU and VCU. I'm actually really upset that these two teams are playing each other because they're two of the hotter teams in the country. And I'm sad that they're going against each other because I wish they were on opposite sides of the bracket here. But I think these are gonna be two like, or this game between BYU and VCU is gonna be one of the best games in this region for the first round. Um, Two very well coached teams, two teams that are on fire. VCU does try to slow down their opponent, and so I'm interested, I guess, to see how BYU handles that. Um, so yeah, I guess just looking forward. I think this region to me is like one of the least intriguing when it comes to storylines. Um, but I feel like the storyline of this region is like a bunch of really exciting offenses. Alabama is exciting offense. Duke has an exciting offense. Wisconsin has like one of the best offenses that they've had in a really long time. And when you think about Wisconsin basketball and their predictive metrics that they have right now, they're just in a spot that they haven't been in a while, which is really exciting. And even Akron has like a really good offense too. So I think this is like the region of the super fun offenses. But I don't know about storylines. What are you seeing here in this
I'm
section?
I'm seeing a few, and they both center around the Duke Blue Devils. So just hear me out here. Let's say that for the sake of this hypothetical, Baylor beats Mississippi State, a Jeremy Roach reunion with Duke in the second round. That's one possible storyline. Now move on. Let's say Duke gets into the Sweet 16 and Arizona gets into the Sweet 16. Caleb Love versus Duke, a rematch of the regular season and obviously the 2022 Final Four, where John Shire was an assistant and watched Caleb Love in Coach K's career in the Final Four. I
Yeah.
think that provides a lot of intrigue. And looking around the rest of that region, a possible matchup of BYU versus Alabama in the Sweet 16, I would be all for that because I think there would be absolutely zero defense played whatsoever. That would just be a complete offensive war. And then I think that the most exciting matchup we could get here, probably, I would say either Duke Bama or maybe Duke BYU in the Elite Eight. I'd be looking forward to those as just pure entertainment aspects. But there's not a whole lot to unpack in here as compared to like the West or the South. But I think that a lot of the action really is going to center around Duke because you've got the obvious headline there, possibly running into a former player, Caleb Love, a sworn enemy of Duke fans. I know that no love is lost there. But yeah, and then when we talk about dark horses as well, I'll just go ahead and give mine right now. BYU, I could easily see things crumbling the right way. They get hot and they make a Final Four and shock everybody.
Well, that's a bummer because my dark horse is going to be VC.
Okay, we got the clash of the dark horses here.
But
This is
not
going
to
to be
make a Final
interesting.
Four, not to make a Final Four, just to make potentially make a Sweet 16. I
Okay.
think that this is a bad matchup for BYU and Wisconsin just played a ton of back-to-back games and they're having to travel to Denver. And I could see VCU getting Wisconsin a little off guard if they end up beating BYU. So VCU is my, Sweet 16 dark horse maybe. But I also really like the possibility of maybe Oregon upsetting Arizona if that's who they
Hmm.
end up matching up with and making a Sweet 16. Dana Altman's really great in the first round. I feel good about them getting to the second round. And Oregon has the length to match Arizona's length inside, and they're just like a hard team to figure out. And they have some decent wins on the season that you're like, how did they win that? Like Alabama
Hmm.
early in the season is a good example of that. So Oregon, I think, has possibility to go to a Sweet 16 too here.
I feel like a lot of people aren't talking about Arizona and Oregon as possible upset spots either. I don't know if that's just me, but I haven't heard Liberty or Akron really thrown around at all much in this bracket making process. Have you? Because I've kind of got the vibe that people just don't see an upset happening there, which I kind of tend to agree with. I think that Oregon and Arizona got favorable matchups in those spots.
Yeah, I think they got super favorable matchups, and I was hoping that Akron would get one that was in their favor because I really like this Akron team, but this Arizona is a bad matchup for them. So I don't like the 13 or 12 seeds in this
Hmm.
region to pull off an
Now,
upset.
Now, you mentioned Wisconsin coming off a bunch of games and being tired and possibly getting got in the second round by a BYU or a VCU. But what about Montana in the first round? We see a pathway there at all? We haven't talked much about that one. I don't necessarily see the path, but I mean, you mentioned the fatigue and the travel, so you never know.
Maybe, and the game's also going to be played in elevation. Montana's used to elevation, Wisconsin isn't. So that's a possibility too.
You're gonna make me
Yeah.
pick Montana now. I didn't even consider the elevation aspect.
Yeah, I don't know
Yeah,
how big of a role that plays in like younger athletes, but I
that's
mean, I'm
true.
sure I'm sure like some to an extent, like if they're not staying hydrated the way that they need to.
Yeah, that's true. I think a lot of this region's going to go where Duke goes. They're kind of going to be the driving force. But we'll move down to the Midwest, the last of the four regions. I'm looking at this and I see a couple of obvious ones again, like in the second rounds and beyond. I think the first round, when you look at it, there's two games that really stick out to me. It's Clemson and McNeese. Will Wade just came out today that he's considered, well, he's not considering, he's full on taking that NC State job when McNeese's season is over. He's gone. He's moving on to a new career at NC State. We'll see how that works out for him. I think NC State made a great hire there, but that's a subject for another day. And then my Kentucky Wildcats, can they get over the first round hump against Troy? I know that a lot of people just out of force of habit these last couple of years are penciling us in as an upset. And I honestly think that Kentucky got a decent draw here when it comes to the 14 seeds that they could have been matched up against. But it's definitely a monkey they're going to have to get off their back. Mark Pope still hasn't gotten a tournament win in his career so far, so that's a storyline in itself, seeing if he can finally, with the elevated role being in a program like Kentucky, maybe just all along it was him being in a smaller kind of program that was holding him back. We'll see. But yeah, Brandy, what do you like in this Midwest region when you take a look at it just from a dramatics element of things?
Yeah, we can say on the Kentucky Troy game, just want to call out that Troy actually has two guys on their team who are brothers, Kobe and Cooper Campbell. Kind
Mm,
of fun fact there. And
nice.
also this week, the Troy head coach made a comment that made it sound like he had recruits on visits and wanted to take them to Waffle House, and they said no. And so he made a point from then forward to not recruit any players who didn't like Waffle House. So Troy might be America's team from just like a fun perspective, and they have the Sun Belt Player of the Year, and Tayton Conaway on their team too, who's really good. Um, but yeah, I agree on the Mark Pope stuff. Like similar to Todd Golden, he hasn't won an NCAA tournament game yet. So can he get past kind of the black mark? The only black mark really that he has on his resume is losing to the worst 11 seed in the history of the NCAA tournament last year in Duquesne. So can he get past that? I think is a good thing to look for here. I do think that he will and he can. And then another thing too, I think in this UCLA Utah State game, Mick Cronin in the middle of the season made it seem like he hated his team to an extent. He made some crazy remarks, and that is Mick Cronin, though. If you've kept up with him or college basketball, you know that sometimes that's just how he is. And then they ended up, putting together, like, I think winning like 11 straight or something like that after losing 4 or 5 in a row, something like that. But I think just keeping an eye on Mick Cronin and kind of how he handles this NCAA tournament will be interesting just because of what happened earlier in the season. And then I think Gonzaga, Georgia is really interesting because everybody is just assuming Gonzaga is going to win. And I picked them in my bracket, yes, and I do think that they win, but nobody's giving Georgia a fighting chance in this game. And Mike White, as a head coach, is 5-0 in the first round of the NCAA tournament. But on the flip side, Mark Few's on a 9-year streak of making the Sweet 16 straight. So, going to be interesting to see which coaching record's broken then. But this Georgia team is shooting the ball really well. Silas Dimmery's playing his best basketball right now, and Gonzaga really has been all over the place, and they've struggled this season closing close games. So, if this game goes down to the wire, I would not be shocked if Georgia pulls out the win because of how Gonzaga has been in late game situations, which I never think that I would have ever said that about a Mark Few coach team. But that's just kind of the culture of this team this season for whatever reason. And on Gonzaga's team, they do have a former SEC player. So there's 2 SEC teams in here, not the team that he played on, Cleef Battle. He played at Arkansas, but he's on Gonzaga, so he knows maybe some of the teams in here in Georgia and Tennessee and Kentucky. So there's that. And then there's Calvin Sampson, the 1 seed in this region in Houston. And LJ Cryer has been there forever. They have probably the best defensive player in the country in Tugler on their team. And Calvin Sampson is one of the best coaches in college basketball, but he doesn't have a national championship. So can he do that? Can he get there? And can he get through this? I think Houston kind of got a little bit of a bad draw with Gonzaga, Georgia for their second round game. But I think if they can get through that second round, they have a really good shot at making the Final Four and potentially making a national championship. So I would say just keeping an eye on Calvin Sampson and can he get it done? Can he get past the hump and get his national championship?
There's one thing too that we haven't mentioned that I'm looking at. The 2 seed Tennessee. Do they finally break through and make that elusive Final Four that program's been chasing for so long? That's a storyline of itself there. I don't think that this is the year for them, to be quite honest. And then just looking at other matchups as well. Purdue versus High Point. I really like not Purdue, excuse me. I really like High Point in that spot. I'm picking High Point in my brackets. I think they get it done and set up a date with McNeese in the second round. Houston versus Gonzaga, like you mentioned, if that's the matchup we get, Mark Few's streak of Sweet 16s being on the line, that would be something to keep an eye on as well. Could they give Houston a scare there? There's definitely pieces to, but like you said, the problems down the stretch all season long haven't gone away from Gonzaga, and they're still there here now. So that's something to keep an eye on. And also, Kentucky versus Tennessee possibly meeting in the Sweet 16. Those fan bases, as someone from the Kentucky fan base, we cannot stand Tennessee fans, and they can't stand us. It's one of the most hot rivals in the SEC, and I think that being a possible matchup in the Sweet 16, that could be one that people want to keep an eye on. But dark
Yeah.
horses, just thinking about dark horses in this region, maybe I'm trying to think here. I've got my eye on a couple. I think that maybe Illinois could be a dark horse because you never know what you're going to get with them. They're so up and down, but when they're at their peak, they look phenomenal. I don't know what you think about that, but I'm looking at that and thinking that might be a possible dark horse spot.
Yeah, I like it. They're super talented. They're just really young and they're still a great rebounding team. They just got to get some offensive stuff figured out. I like that pick. I honestly think that Clemson might be a little bit of a dark horse here if they don't get upset in the first round against McNeese. Clemson made the Elite Eight last year, and even though they're without one of their better guards that just got injured, I think that they have the size and scoring and a good matchup possibility in the second round to maybe make an Elite Eight again. depending on how depending on what Houston does. So I would say Clemson might be a team that I would say is a little bit of a dark horse here to make a Sweet 16 or an Elite Eight possibly.
Yeah, and then kind of capping off all these regions, looking at the Final Four, I'll give you two of my storylines that I want to see unfold because we're so far away from there. It's hard to forecast right now. I'll just give two of mine that I think would be great. An all SEC Final Four. They broke the bid record. If they get four teams in, put a stamp on the dominance that they've had all season long, I think that would be a crazy thing to witness in college basketball, not something that you're accustomed to seeing. And then when I look at the national title game, I think that a matchup that could be possible that you would probably hate just from a dramatic side of thing, Auburn versus Alabama in the
Oh
national title
gosh, I
game.
would not
I,
survive.
I would love to see that. I would love to see the All SEC Final Four. Those are the two storylines that I'm dying to see unfold when it comes to the Final Four and the national title in San Antonio. But what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I would love to see, and obviously I'm biased here, I would love to see a national championship rematch game between Auburn and Duke, and with the National Player of the Year conversation at the forefront of this season between Janai Broome and Cooper Flagg. I think it would be really exciting to watch those two teams play again. Um, but also I think, and this is so chalky, but all of the one seeds this year are so strong and so good. And we haven't seen an all Final Four one seed since 2008. I think it would be really exciting to see that again. And we'd see some high caliber basketball being played. If that were the case, we'd see a rematch between Auburn and Florida, who only played once this season. Then we'd see Duke and Houston play each other, which I think would be kind of two really good defenses going at it. And then Duke's has obviously an awesome offense too. And Houston's offense has come along too. So I just think that those two styles of basketball, they're very different, but would be really interesting to watch. So an all one seed Final Four. And then just the possibility with how college basketball has gone this season. We've seen some crazy upsets happen this year. And I think that it would be really exciting to see a first time national champion. So maybe that's something to keep an eye on, because there are a lot of those teams out there who haven't won a national champion yet. And with UConn not being as good as they are, it leaves the door open for not a three-peat to happen and for a first time national champion to come in there.
And the what I would call the most unrealistic storyline to unfold that would absolutely just be hilarious is if, like I said earlier, Dan Hurley just flips a switch, they go on an absolutely just merciless run and pull off the three-peat. I don't think that's going to happen, but God, until the clock hits triple zeros, like I've said over and over again, with Dan Hurley on the losing side, it's going to be
Hard to
hard
bet
for me
against
to.
him.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, we're so used to just seeing them dominate. It's really just going to have to be like right in front of my face, them losing in the tournament for it all to just set in that they're human now. But yeah, this tournament, it's going to be absolutely wild. I would imagine it always is. The madness always delivers, and it's all starting tomorrow. And we're going to be covering every single storyline that could possibly unfold from here on out, and we'll see if some of ours end up coming to fruition.